Once upon a time, in a place called England, one fine couple was united under a marriage bond as a sign of their love. It was a great day for them as they had entered a new phase in life and had vowed to complement each other. Mr. and Mrs. Balfour had married in the year of 1900. They lived a happy life as a husband and wife where they completed each other.
Mr. Balfour was a civil engineer and had to return to Ceylon because he was a resident of Ceylon where he held a government appointment under the government of Ceylon as Director of Irrigation. His wife, Mrs. Balfour, accompanied him to go there and they lived in Ceylon for 15 years. The couple returned to England in 1906 for a short visit before they went back to Ceylon. In 1908, Mrs. Balfour had returned to England alone as she had to undergo an operation. Upon completion, Mrs. Balfour has returned to her husband in Ceylon. Mrs. Balfour came to England with her husband who was on leave. They remained in England until August 1916 when the husband's leave was up and he had to return back to Ceylon. However, under the doctor's advice, Mrs. Balfour had to remain in England because of her disallowed condition.
In August 1916, Mr. Balfour is about to sail back to Ceylon because his leave had expired and he had said to his wife,
"Honey, I have to go back to Ceylon because my leave was up. I need to go there as soon as possible. I have a lot of jobs to be done. I hope you understand."
But the doctor advised me to stay here for a couple of months because I have rheumatoid arthritis. Perhaps I could go back to Ceylon in November.
Oh, alright. I understand, honey. I hope you're doing fine.
I need some money to cover all my expenses here. Could you give me some money, please?
Alright. I'll give you some money. How much did you need, sweetheart?
How about £34 per month? I think it will be enough for me. What do you think?
What? Ridiculous. It's too much, honey. I can't afford that. Alright. How about I give you £30 per month until you go back to Ceylon? How about it?
Alright, honey. £30 is enough for me. But how about this month? You will sail to Ceylon in 8 August and I have to stay here alone. How much will I get for this month?
Oh, alright, honey. This is the check of £24 for this month. I think it would be enough for you. Later, I'll give you £30 per month until you go back to Ceylon. How about it?
Alright. Thank you, dear. £24 is enough for me. I will use it wisely, okay?
I have to go now, honey. The ship is about to sail in a couple of hours. See you when I see you. Take care.
You, dear. I hope you have a safe journey back to Ceylon. Take care and I love you.
Alright, I love you, honey.
Mr. Balfour had sailed back to Ceylon on August 8, leaving his wife in England. However, after a while, Mr. Balfour wrote a letter to his wife that stated that they better stay apart from now on.
and this is how the case of Balfour versus the Balfour begin. Introduction. The plaintiff, which is the wife, sued her husband, the defendant, for money due under an alleged verbal agreement whereby he undertook to allow her 30L a month in consideration of her agreeing to support herself without calling upon him for any further maintenance. The parties were married in 1900. The husband was resident in Ceylon, where he held a government appointment. The plaintiff accompanied him in Ceylon, but in 1915 they returned to England, which the husband was on leave. In 1916, he went back to Ceylon, leaving his wife alone in England, where she had to remain temporarily under a doctor's advice. The parties alleged that the defendant, before returning back to Ceylon, entered into the above agreement. The parties remaining apart, the plaintiff subsequently obtained a decree nisi for restitution of conjugal rights and an order for alimony, held that the alleged agreement did not constitute a legal contract, but was an ordinary domestic arrangement which could not be sued upon. Mutual promises made in the ordinary domestic relationship of husband and wife do not of necessity give cause for an action of a contract. Parties of the case. The appellant is Mr. Balfour and respondent is Mrs. Balfour. The name of the judges are Warrington, Duke and Atkin LJJ. Facts of the case. Mr. and Mrs. Balfour were a married couple in the 19th century. Mr. Balfour was a civil engineer who worked in Ceylon, which is known as Sri Lanka. In 1915, Mrs. Balfour and his wife went to England for a vacation. His wife became ill and her doctor advised that she could not return to Ceylon due to her illness, which is called arthritis. They make an agreement that Mrs. Balfour would stay in England. Meanwhile, Mr. Balfour would return back to Ceylon. In that case, Mr. Balfour told Mrs. Balfour that he would pay her TTL a month during his time in Ceylon. Unfortunately, the amount of money that Mr. Balfour agreed to send slowly decreased to 20L to went to none. Mrs. Balfour decided to sue her husband, stating that Mr. Balfour had legal obligation under contract to continue paying her the TTL amount and demanded for divorce. Although Mrs. Balfour succeeded at first instance, an additional judge of the King's Bench Division held that the husband was under responsibility to support his wife and there exists a strong contract between the husband and wife. The consent of the wife to this order of monthly transfer was valid as there was a contract between the couple.
Nice.
Thus, found the contract binding, which Mr. Balfour appealed.
Legal issue and ratio decidendi. Whether Mr. Balfour offer intend to be legally binding, whether the fact that they were husband and wife matter, whether the contract between Mr. and Mrs. Balfour valid in nature. The first ratio decidendi is the relationships between husband and wife are agreement under which mutual promises occur. There are not contracts unless the party did wish to take part in the legal repercussions. Secondly, agreement made between a husband and wife to provide money are generally not contracts because the parties do not intend to be attained by legal ends. Commonly, parties to a marriage will make arrangements for personal or household expenses, even though there may be a present of such amount to consider if it had occurred between different parties. The Court of Appeal, without exception, held that there was no enforceable agreement. And lastly, the Balfour case made it very clear that the legal intention to enter into a contract is very necessary. The Balfour case raises the importance of the concept of legal intention as a basic and necessity to validate a contract.